time for the Property Podcast, where every week tens of thousands of property investors, new and experienced, join together to get news, knowledge and laughs at our expense. With me, Rob Bence.
And me, Rob Dix. Join us every Thursday morning for your weekly dose of property ideas and motivation. Then head over to our website at thepropertypodcast.com to keep the conversation going. Now though, let's get started.
Hello and welcome to the Property Podcast. It is episode 57. I'm Rob Bence in the UK. And finally, Rob Dix. Where are you?
Also in the UK, Rob.
Welcome, Rob. How are you? Welcome home.
Thank you. Yeah, good to be back, especially because there's so much good stuff coming up in terms of meetups and everything else, but we're going to come on to that, so I wouldn't want to miss any of those. But coming up in this episode, we're going to ask, will pension reforms cause a property boom in 2015? So this is a pretty big topic. We're going to get into that. We've also got a really important news story and a resource of the week that we couldn't believe that we haven't done before.
Yeah, we probably have, but you can tell us off if that's the case. But I've started using it a lot more over the past week or so. So it's well worth a mention again if we have. Okay. Rob, before we get going, we've got lots to pack in, but the reviews have been coming in fast and furious. We asked for the people to leave us reviews to get to the 200. We were on 195, and now we're on 199. So no different music this week to celebrate going through 200 reviews, but we will still give a round of applause to the following. Bring on the commute. Enbeck says, commuting has never been so informative. I almost look forward to my half-hour drive to work. Thanks for the time and effort, sharing your knowledge and providing great inspiration. As a result, I hope to get back into property investment soon. Thank you very much. Nick Knox says, I don't know if that's his real surname. I'm sorry if it is. Fantastic resource. As an aspiring property investor looking to make my first investment this year, the Property Podcast has given us a framework for our research and development towards that goal. The two Robs are clearly passionate about property and speak from experience and are fun to listen to. We look forward to future episodes and working with RMP. And they've signed off as Tom and Nikki. So hi, Tom and Nikki. Thank you for the review. Podcasting at its best. I came across this podcast recently while I was looking for something different to listen to. Wow, what a find. Rob and Rob work so well together, bouncing off ideas off each other. It took a while saving up, but me and my girlfriend are waiting to buy our first buy-to-let and it's ready to go through now. Our next one will be with so much more insight and research, of course, due to this podcast. Thanks again, guys. Looking forward to possibly working with you in the future. And that's from Long John. Well, congratulations, Long John. Well done. For doing your first buy-to-let. The first is always the hardest, so congratulations to you.
Yeah, and thank you everyone for the reviews. Also, along similar lines, I got an email from a listener just yesterday who first emailed me months ago when he just finished reading my book, Property Investment for Beginners, and then he emailed me again the other day to say he was just about to complete on his first investment. And so that was great. And it's so good to hear about people not just listening to this information, but really taking action on it. So it's always great to hear. And thank you for taking the time to tell us about that. But if you've got a similar story to share, then do leave us a review or jump into the Property Hub. We love to hear from people's success stories.
We do. Congratulations again to both of you. Rob, we've got a big episode, but we've got a few things of what we've been up to and what's coming up to get through quickly. First of all, bloggers. We've got some fantastic bloggers over at the Property Hub. We'll link to it in the show notes, but the content is outstanding. The amount of commitment and level of information people are donating to the Property Hub through blogs is, well, frankly awesome. You've got to go and have a look. We've got so many people in there contributing, Rob, some really, really high-level people, haven't we?
Yeah, we have, and covering a really big range of subjects as well. The idea being that, we don't know everything, and we've only got one perspective, and so we'd like to bring in people who know about things that we don't or have ideas that are different from our own. So we've got people like Nick Stott, who runs Homeshore. We've got Pete Matthew from Meaningful Money. We've got Graham Clark from Money Stepper. We've got Ian Wallace talking about the financial side. We've got the HMO landlady covering off that side of things, and we're going to be adding more as well. So do get over to the Property Hub, check out the latest blog posts, and if you're not following us on Twitter or Facebook already, make sure you do that, because then you'll be notified when a new post goes up as well, and we'll bung the links for those into the show notes as well.
We will. Okay. And Rob, this goes out on the Thursday just before the Easter bank holiday, but on bank holiday Monday at 3 p.m. in Liverpool is a big event. And no, Liverpool aren't playing. It is the Liverpool Property Podcast Meetup.
Yep. So we were asked for a up north meetup. We had a vote as to where to have it. Liverpool won under slightly suspicious circumstances. But we're very happy to be going there. If you want to join us, you've still got a few days if you're listening to this episode on the day it comes out, which you should be, of course. Just go to the propertyhub.net/Liverpool. You can book your tickets there. They're completely free, of course. We just want to get an idea of numbers. I've been watching the booking confirmations come in. Really excited. I recognise lots of names from the Property Hub and from people who've left us reviews and emails. I'm really excited to be putting some faces to names.
Yes, and finally this week, just to mention that we're getting a lot of emails in asking us when is the Property Hub Plus reopening, because people are seeing what's going on there and they want to be a part of it. We are very close to being able to do that again. Everyone's getting bedded down who's in there already. So if you're keen and you want to be the first to hear about when it does reopen, we'll link to the show notes. You can basically go to the Property Hub, click on the Property Hub Plus section and put your name down on the waiting list, and we'll contact you as soon as it reopens. So that's our updates, Rob. But you've been kind enough to dig up a news story this week.
Well, technically, Richard Brown, a prolific Property Hub user and a member of Property Hub Plus, has dug it out, and I just found it on his newsfeed, which is excellent, and I'll be linking to that in the show notes. But the story that he picked out was from The Telegraph, and this is a story about the small print that could cost landlords thousands, and it's talking about letting agents' contracts and some terms in there that can eat into your returns. And in Richard's commentary, he picked out a few examples that have happened to him. And in the article itself, it's talking about clauses like where if you sort of sack off your agent, you still have to pay them as long as the tenant they found remains there, about having to pay crazy amounts to them if the tenant buys the property, and about kind of more common things like maintenance fees and markups on those and all that kind of thing. There's lots of examples in the piece. Richard adds his own. And really, I don't think it's surprising to have a letting agents are ripping you off story. That's the whole reason that we've started Yellow Lettings, of course. But it is just a reminder that you should always read the small print, however small and boring it looks, because chances are, after easing you in with some fairly standard stuff, towards the end when you might have given up, they'll sort of whack you with something bizarre.
Yeah, well, we're going to have to go back and redo our terms now, Rob. That's half our business model.
Yeah, they're blowing the whistle on us.
And thank you, Richard Brown, for finding that. Rob, you took credit for that pre-show. Naughty.
I know. I decided I had to come clean. So in the show notes, the show notes are at thepropertyhub.net/pensions this week. So thepropertyhub.net/pensions is the place to go to find a link to that story and everything else we're talking about this week. And so that, of course, introduces our topic of the week. Will pension reforms cause a property boom in 2015? So before we start, a disclaimer, this is not advice by any means. What we want to do in this episode is describe what has happened, what the reforms are, and talk about how they might affect you, just in a kind of a big picture overview kind of way. This is not specific advice. Around this topic, everyone is going to have their own opinion. It's something that's been talked about a lot since it's happened. It's going to continue being talked about for the next year or more. Everyone's going to have their own self-interest and their own biases. We are just as biased as anyone else, although we're going to sort of try and strike a balance in this episode. But really, the essential thing is to listen to everyone in the aggregate and make up your own mind. And if you can, talk to a financial planner who invests in property. That way, they're going to have a balanced viewpoint if you do want to take professional advice. So, Rob, that's the disclaimer out of the way. What's happened so far?
Okay, so in the budget a few weeks ago, the Chancellor was going through the motions, some interesting stuff, but nothing groundbreaking. And then he announced the pension system reform. Okay. Now, we're going to go into the pension system reform in a moment, but since then, two things have really happened. You've had one large group of people saying that money is going to flow into the buy-to-let market and property prices are going to rise. And then on the other side, you've had IFAs and financial planners going out their way to say, no, don't do property. It's probably not a good thing to do. Now, really, it's probably somewhere in the middle because, as we said, we're biased. So we're going to lean towards property. As you listen to this, remember, we love property. We invest in it. So we're going to have a natural bias to it. But so do, IFAs and financial planners. They have a natural bias to financial products. We can try and be as impartial as we like, and we will do our best, but you have to take everything we say with a pinch of salt, as with anybody who is related to selling or advising on certain products. So they're the two extremes. Buy-to-let's going to boom and we're all going to be rich, and you shouldn't do it. So what actually should you do? Where's the balance? Well, that's what we're going to try and find out. But before we do, Rob, should we dig down to exactly what the reforms are?
Yeah, so let's give a quick overview. Last week we linked to an article that described this, but let's give it a quick recap. So the idea is that from the 6th of April 2015, next year, anyone is going to be able to take their entire pension fund in cash. So the first 25% will be tax-free, as is the case right now, and the rest of it will be taxable as income. Currently, you can still access the 25% tax-free, but there are restrictions on what you can do with the other 75%. And it's those restrictions that are going to be lifted. So what this essentially means is that you can take that 75% that previously you would have had to use to buy an annuity, and you can do anything with it at all. You'll be taxed on it. You have to pay the tax if you take it out as cash, but you can do what you want. You can blow it on all on fast cars and holidays. You can do with it other types of investments other than property, or you can put it into property. And you can take this over whatever period of time you like. So it's not like you have to make this decision as soon as it becomes available to you. Personally, I think that whatever ends up happening as a result of this, I like the general idea. I like the fact that, as with many other countries, it's now going to be the case that you get to decide what to do with your money. Obviously, there is a risk that people are going to make bad decisions with it, but I like the general thrust that you've been saving up money for all these years. You then don't have to be locked into a limited range of products. You can choose to put it into property, to blow the lot, to do the same as you would have done in the first place. That aside, the thing that people immediately jumped onto was that everyone would take their pension and invest in property. And Rob, you've got an example of why people might want to do exactly that.
I agree, Rob, with your last point that I think these reforms are positive. So overall, there are obviously going to be some detractors from it, but generally, and I think across the industries, people are saying it's a good thing for people to have choice. But why property? Well, let's say you had a healthy pension pot of £100,000. Currently, you could take £25,000 of that as a lump sum, tax-free. And then the other 75%, normally you would put that into an annuity. There are some other options, but as we said, there are many restrictions. Okay, so an annuity is effectively an insurance. And what you do is with your £75,000, you'll buy this insurance, this annuity, and that will pay you out a fixed amount each month until you die. Okay, that sounds good, that sounds safe, and that sounds predictable, which it is. However, annuities are unpopular. Let's have a look why. Well, on that £75,000 that you put into annuity, you would be paid, if you retired at 65, around £312 per month. So £75,000 in an annuity would give you £312 per month. And that'd probably be index linked at that level, so it'll go up with inflation. Unfortunately, though, when you die, it dies with you. You may have a policy that it passes on to your partner, but in most cases, the annuity will die with you. So if you're unfortunate enough to retire and then hit by a bus 2 weeks later, your annuity is probably gone. It's understandably not a popular way to invest your pension. However, there haven't been many choices, but that's changing. And one of the choices you can opt for from April 2015, is property. So let's have a look at property. So we already know £25,000 of that 100,000 is tax-free. So you have 75 remaining. Okay. Now it'd be more efficient to split that into 37.5 over 2 years and take it as an income that way, which would leave you 29,000 each year. And therefore that would leave you with 83,000 to invest with your tax-free sum. So let me break that down. In year one, you take your 25k tax-free and 37.5 down from your pension, which would leave you with about 29,000. The following year, you take 37.5 out, which would leave you with roughly again 29,000. So then you've got 25, 29 and 29. That totals up to 83,000. Okay, so now you've got 83,000 to invest. So you've taken a £17,000 hit. That's the first thing you've got to point out. But can you make that money work harder? Now, a lot of financial commentators have said on that 83,000, you're likely only to get a 4% return through property. This is the average.
It is the average, but since when have we ever been interested in average? So we had a listener question last week about the ROI we look for, and we said that an ROI of 8 to 10% is a pretty sound number that we look for. Obviously, if you're doing HMOs or something like that, you'd be looking for something even higher. But 8 to 10% ROI is what we personally would look for. So on the amount of money that you've been talking about, Rob, the 83,000, with an 8% ROI, that would give you £586 per month. And at a 10% ROI, if you can secure that, that gives you £696 a month. Now, this being ROI, if you know your property calculations, which we've talked about before, that means you've taken out all your costs. That has all been accounted for, and it takes account of leverage as well. So by the time you've netted out all your costs and you've used leverage to take on some borrowing to magnify your returns, that's where you end up with. If you get a 10% ROI, you could have £696 pre-tax to take home at the end of each month. Also, you own an asset. So as well as getting this monthly return, you have an asset which should go up in value. So if you've invested this and leveraged at 75%, which is what we've assumed, you could buy an asset or assets, because you probably wouldn't want to put it into a single property, worth £332,000. And if those assets double every 10 years, which is an assumption that we've talked about before and we will talk about again very soon, then in 20 years' time, those assets will be worth £1.3 million. That is not a bad legacy to be passing on compared to zero with an annuity. So that's a pretty good case, isn't it? Why wouldn't you invest in property?
Yeah, I mean, returns double of what an annuity gives and an asset. Why wouldn't you? Well, actually, there are reasons why you wouldn't invest in a property. First of all, if you've never invested in property before and then you retire, becoming an investor or a landlord for the first time might be quite intimidating. Emotionally, the first investment you do is by far the hardest, not in terms of laying everything out and processing it. But the reason why your first investment's the hardest, because the emotional roller coaster you go through, because there's all the unknowns. Once you actually do it, you think, what was the fuss about? But the lead up to it is actually quite dramatic at times. So if you're doing that for the first time when you've retired, that might be just a bit too much for you to take on. And perhaps if you've not done it before, that's not a good idea. Also, annuities, although the return is far less, they pay you whatever happens. Properties can have void periods. So you try to minimize them best you can by investing in good areas with good fundamentals, but they still can happen. So that could mean from time to time, you'll have a month where you have no income. So it's worth bearing in mind that annuities are constant, where properties will give you a better return, but you may have void periods. So if you've invested in property before retirement, then property may seem like a no-brainer. I mean, if you're a property podcast listener, you invest in property already and you have a pension pot, then it's probably likely that you're going to lean towards, as we would, with your natural bias towards property. However, for people who've never done it before, it probably isn't a wise move. No experience, they don't listen to the podcast, they don't have the education, they don't have that knowledge base to rely on. Just going out and buying a property and hoping something good comes of it probably isn't a good plan. You're probably going to get closer to that average of 4% that's been mentioned. For some people, yes, it's an exceptional way to invest your pension. For others, it won't be. So that's why property investment is going to be popular for some and not so popular for others. So Rob, that might be the case, but what's actually going to happen to the property market moving forward?
Well, the obvious conclusion to draw from this is prices will go up, which isn't exactly a surprising conclusion, because it's basic supply and demand. If you've got a restricted amount of supply, which we have, and whatever people have been saying about numbers of new housing starts and all that kind of thing, as we talked about before, the number of houses being built are still far lower than what we actually need. So supply is restricted, and if we get new demand coming in from people who've cashed out their pensions and want to get into property, whether that's a good or a bad thing, it seems likely that prices will go up. And the corollary of that is that yields will eventually decrease. So it means that for us investors, because there are more people chasing a limited number of properties, prices go up. That means that unless rents go up sharply at the same time, which they won't necessarily, the yields will go down. So property will become a less competitive investment. And so that means that, of course, you might find that the ROI we've been talking about is lower. Or, of course, nothing might happen at all. This might all be a bit of a fuss over nothing. But it seems that this, along with many other factors in the market at the moment, means that prices will be going up over the next few years.
Yeah. Now, think back to the beginning of the podcast. If you've been with us long enough or you've listened back, you know Rob and I are bullish on property. You know, we're not about it's all going to go up really fast. In fact, we had to, at the beginning of the podcast, say, don't listen to all the negativity out there. Property is a good long-term investment. And now we're doing the opposite and reeling people back. Property prices, I think will rise next year. As economists would say, all things being equal, things can change and new reforms or measures can come in which could affect it. But as things stand at the moment, it looks highly likely that property is really going to kick on next year. And subsequently, in time, yields will decrease. We have to look at markets that already have this pension model, Australia being a prime example. Nearly a third of people use their pension money to either pay down their current mortgage or invest in more property. So a third's pushed into property one way or another. If that happens here in the UK, that's going to have a big effect on the property market. So what should you do? Well, not a lot, really. You need to keep your eye on the returns more than ever. So we've talked about 8 to 10% ROI. Don't get caught up in the hype and start accepting less because the property market's going up. So yes, you may have to accept a little less, but don't accept really poor yields. And Rob will explain why in a minute. And carry on as before. Be prepared. Be prepared for hype. Be prepared for lots of media stories and spin about how this boom is different and we're all going to be rich really quickly. And be prepared for prices to go up. But remember, as we've always said, property is for long-term investment.
Yeah, right back at the start of this, we talked about biases and we talked about how different people are going to have different biases. One group of people who've got a bias to make everything sound really dramatic and scary is the media. So whatever happens, be prepared for lots of headlines in the Express about property prices going up £100 a day and lots of stories in the Guardian about how it's going to ruin everything. There's going to be lots and lots of hype about this, and it's important not to get caught up in it. And as an investor, I think the important thing is don't rush to buy now just because you think money is going to flood in next year and push up prices. Investing is for the long term. You definitely don't want to be rushing in and buying just anything you can get your hands on now when it doesn't stack up particularly well. It's not a great term long investment just because you're getting caught up in all these headlines about how prices are going up. It's like, I must get in now before I miss the boat. That is not a good idea. Booms will happen. Busts will happen. Property is a long-term investment and you've got to see it as such. And then on the other side, if you're someone who's coming up to taking your pension soon, I think the takeaway from this, again, is think very carefully. For a start, we've kind of presented this as a binary decision. It doesn't have to be, of course. You can still take some of your pension as cash, put that into property, and then buy an annuity so you've got the security as well. But as well as that, before doing anything with your pension and property, make sure you've educated yourself and thought about all the implications. We've said recently, we should probably say it again, we've possibly been guilty in the past of making property sound easy because we're so enthusiastic about it. But it's not. Things can and do go wrong, and it can be a lot more work than you think. So definitely don't sort of pop everything into property thinking, this is the answer. No, you've got to make the right investment in the first place, and you've got to be prepared for everything that can happen along the way. So whether you are someone thinking about taking your pension and putting it into property, or just an investor thinking about how this is going to affect you, don't rush to do anything. We've set out how we see things. Other people are going to set things out in different ways, but just don't rush. See how things play out and don't deviate from your normal approach. Always come back to the fundamentals and your ROI.
Absolutely. Well summarised, Robert. Well summarised. I don't think I've ever called you Robert on the podcast before. And I wasn't telling you off. Okay.
Yeah, I thought my mum would come in for a minute.
You are back in the UK.
It's true. It's true. So that's our summary. We would love to know what you think as well. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of debate around this. The show notes for this episode are at thepropertyhub.net/pensions. And at the bottom of those show notes, there's going to be a link over to a special topic in the Property Hub dedicated to this subject where you can go in and you can have your say. We'd love to hear your views.
Absolutely. Listen back to this episode again. There's a lot to take in. But once you've done that, jump over to the Property Hub where we'll be carrying out this discussion so you can ask your questions and share your viewpoints. We'd love to hear both. Okay. So our resource of the week. We were back on it last week and we're back on it this week, and it's a sauna. So hat tip to Nick Stott from Homeshore. Nick put me onto this one for my business, RMP. So we have started using this a lot now. We sort of dipped our toes in a while back, but Asana is a big part of how RMP runs to be more efficient. Now, how to describe it? There's so much you can do with Asana it's task management, basically. If I had to describe it in 2 words, task management. But I think that really undersells what it can do. I'll link to Asana's website because their blog is brilliant and it gives you some great ideas on how you can use it. And they've got lots of videos as well, giving you plenty of ideas too. I highly recommend following them on their blog and watching those videos before you get started, because otherwise you could just download it, which is free, and not really use it. And that's what I did a few months back, but now we're using it and I think it's fantastic. So check out Asana. We'll link to it in the show notes, but thanks, Nick. I appreciate the heads up on that one. It was really good.
Okay. I don't have much to add to this one because I haven't used it. I'm a diehard Trello fan, which we've talked about before. It sounds like Asana is a little bit more powerful. So if you find yourself restricted by Trello, then maybe Asana is worth the look. And maybe I'll come back to it at some point. But try out both. There's nothing to lose. They're both free. See which works for you. Okay, so that is about it for this episode. I've really enjoyed this one. And we've got another interesting one coming up next week. While we're doing slightly inflammatory topics, next week we're going to be talking about, does property double in price every 10 years?
You know what, Rob? I've enjoyed this one. My favourite ones have been the boring ones, pensions, this one, and inflation, episode 24. So hopefully people haven't been put off the title. And if you have made it this far, well done.
Well done indeed.
Okay, so that's us for another week. I look forward to next week's episode. Another good topic. I'm really enjoying getting back into property. I've really missed it. So I'm really enjoying the podcast at the moment. So I hope you are too. But until next week, Rob, I'll meet you for a cup of tea before we record. And obviously we've got the meetup on Monday, so we can report back on that soon. But until next Thursday, everyone, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to The Property Podcast. Make sure you join our mailing list at thepropertypodcast.com.
And remember, we love 5-star reviews. Rob even loves them more than air miles.